Visionary. By Douglas Milewski. Elemental P. United States. Copyright 2016 by Douglas Milewski. All rights reserved. Chapter 20. I sent the telegram, then we went back to the farm. While we waited, the Fitzgeralds let me wash up, giving me yet more clothes. That afternoon they fed us a feast of roast chicken, biscuits, cream of celery soup, and raspberry pie. Annie even pulled out her sacred stash of coffee. When Joe and Charlie showed up in the middle of dinner, Annie pulled up a few more chairs, seating them. I don't think that I ever heard Joe say less than when he was eating at Annie's table. Joe didn't know who Edna was, but he and Charlie picked up on the ruse quickly enough, acting as if she were a normal part of my life. Joe almost had us out of there, but then Annie offered coffee, and even Charlie melted in the face of opposition. I suppose that I tasted the food, but I doubt it. You get that way when somebody's died. Numb. You get this numbness that goes through to your bone marrow. Taste, sight, smell, these things stop mattering. You exist and you do no more than exist. Some part of your soul has been ripped out, emptying itself into the streets in sympathy. It felt like the Madonna with her bloody hands. Joe drove us home in a yellow Duesenberg Model X, somewhere between the speed of a diving hawk and a shooting star. If I had been given the job of counting fence posts, I would have failed because I couldn't see the post. The car moved like a fighter plane on wheels. I had no idea where Joe got it from. The military checkpoints didn't stop us either. Every single one of those soldiers saluted us at full attention. Later I found out that the car actually belonged to a general who had been a former aviation pilot. There weren't many of these cars in existence, so his yellow car had become legend among the soldiers. I needed that fear of death as we slid around corners. I needed to outrun what lay behind me. I needed anything and everything to keep my lamentation at bay. Mel was dead. The best of us was gone. What would become of us now? What I needed now was Luke Mather, but with Mel dead, how could I go see Luke? When Mel died, my entire family disintegrated along with him. I lost both a brother and a father. I know writers who can discuss lamentation at length, exploring the experience with prose one mere step away from poetry. I don't know anything about poetry, so you must take it as said that my sorrow here was as deep and sincere as theirs. They are men of talent, while I am merely a man of sincerity. At the Baroness's house there were more cars parked outside than I'd ever seen before, stretching out of the driveway in both ways up and down the street. I knew that this was no party. She was now governor, or soon to be. Her house was the government until the military secured Annapolis. A crowd had assembled in her side yard, forming a semicircle about her gazebo. Based on the number of cameras that I saw and the radio trucks, I knew that her swearing in was fast approaching. A soldier directing traffic saluted on seeing us, directing us up to the house. As soon as I stepped out, Cymbeline hurled herself into my arms, a gossamer frost. I feared for you, she said, letting go of me almost immediately. Tell me that you're all right. I'm all right, but Mel is dead. She nodded her head as knew what Mel meant to me. Did they hurt you? She asked, looking up to me with her winter eyes. I don't know. It was more complicated than that. Charlie helped out Edna. Who is she? I leaned down and whispered, Edna Clark. Cymbeline looked at me with horror, stressing every question. Her? Here? How? That's a long story. I hadn't needed to whisper. No one there besides us knew who Edna was. I could have shouted her name from the top of the house and people would have thought only that I was crazy and in love, except that I didn't know if I could love at all. A bullhorn told us to get ready. Charlie took Edna inside while Cymbeline and I wound our way around the crowd. A judge stood with Baroness Paget, Bible in hand. Cymbeline said, she'll only be governor until we hold an election. Everyone agreed that a woman isn't electable, so the public will know that there's no way that she'll hold on to power. Do you believe that? I think she'll make a wonderful governor. She's going to need a secretary. I'll be going with her to Annapolis. She was going away. No apologies. I felt like I had just been dropped like a lead balloon. Cymbeline said, the Baroness told me the plan. Because she's going to be the temporary governor, she can focus entirely on cleanup without consideration of her future electability. She's going to make many enemies when she starts prosecuting people, and even more when she starts forgiving them. I had to agree. People were vengeful. In the circle, the judge, a mostly bald, white-bearded fellow and a vicious bridge player, smiled congenially. Are we all ready? Nobody objected. The photographers all had their tripods steady. The reporters had their pads. The radio men had their microphones and wires. A radio man said, "We're on in 10-9-8?" After 1, the Baroness spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen of our fair land, this is Hildegard Paget, your Baroness, addressing you from my lawn in the free state of Maryland. In a moment, I shall be sworn in as your governor, to serve the people until an election can be held. Do not doubt, my friends, that there will be an election. Although the army has overthrown a corrupt administration, it has not overthrown the people. The rule of law can and must still apply, from the lowest street cleaner to the highest general. As a woman, I assure you, I am especially well suited to the task of cleaning house. Elbow grease will be applied vigorously. I will not stop until this house is clean." The reporters chuckled. "I will now be sworn into office." The judge stepped up and led her through the oath. When she said, "I so do swear," the audience clapped for her. The Baroness shook the judge's hand, then let him walk off. She picked up her prepared speech, putting on her best moral voice. "Now that I am governor, I officially declare a state of emergency within our fair land. As soon as peace prevails, I shall ask the army to withdraw and stand down the National Guard. I pardon all political prisoners. In addition, I will appoint an emergency commission of responsible men to review all convictions. Those who have been unjustly imprisoned must be released. No man or woman should ever be imprisoned for their political beliefs, their religion, or their honest profession. I pardon all innocent wizards. Do not misunderstand my move. Those of that profession who have abused their power shall continue in prison, but those who have done nothing wrong other than practicing their ancient profession shall be released. I do not pardon them because some anarchists want this, I pardon them because it is the right and just thing to do. I shall continue to hunt for the anarchists that threaten our state, and see that the full force of moral law applies to them. I do not pursue them for their beliefs, but for the measurable harm that they have caused to our society. With my emergency authority, I suspend prohibition in our state until a referendum can be held. I shall let the citizens speak on this matter." The press corps broke into applause. I laughed to myself. I didn't know the legalities of that, but who was going to stop her? Everyone hated prohibition. When the applause of the press died down, she continued. I asked the legislature to place themselves in an emergency session. I have a duty to you, the people, to protect our rights. I shall submit to the legislature a list of laws that must be repealed as being incompatible with a free society. Finally, I call upon all good citizens to do their duties, to remain good citizens, to help their neighbors, to stay calm in this time of crisis, and to go about their daily routines. Thank you. I shall speak again soon. The engineer made a motion, and the Baroness was off the air. Immediately, the horde of reporters dashed for their typewriters, while photographers dashed for their cars, all intent on getting their stories in first. One guy even had a film camera, but he wasn't rushing at all. A thump on my back got my attention. I turned to see a friendly face with a walnut pipe. He stuck his hand into mine. "John, good to see you. Do you have a position yet?" I didn't remember his name. "No, I just got in." "I'll be controller. You're good with numbers. I'd love to have you. Just say so and I'll make a place." "Thanks," I said. He tipped his pipe to Cymbeline, then wandered off. Cymbeline squeezed my arm. "I have to go. The Baroness is giving me mounds of work." With a cold peck on my cheek, she made her way off through the crowd. As I walked back to the house, a few other fellows wandered up, all of whom I knew from various parties, all of whom offered me some position or another. Apparently, I was seen as a competent man. Keeping score in bridge will do that to your reputation. That was an idyllic moment before we were reminded of just how ugly men could be. I wound up in the kitchen. Joe had a beer set aside for me at the table. Meanwhile, Charlie helped the cook prep dinner. The Negro woman had emptied the larder as the crowd was considerable. She said, "Don't ask me about breakfast." I wasn't done eating a sandwich, heels for both slices, before the first reporter found me. He plopped his story in front of me and waited. "The Sun," he said. Feeling humorous, I said, "I'm not your editor." "Just okay it, buddy." I raised an eyebrow. The man backed down a little, holding his hand up. "Please. I have a deadline." The story itself was factually correct. With the last page was a $5 bill. Now I understood. Apparently we didn't have a press censor in place, so I was the most obvious answer. We didn't need censors anymore. I handed both the bill and the paper back to the reporter. "Run it." The reporter looked at me like I was mad. Before he was out, the next reporter came in. He put his $5 on top. He had spelled a few names wrong. "Pen," I said, "I need a pen." Joe popped out, bringing me a pen from somewhere. I marked the edits, then handed the story back along with the $5. That reporter looked equally incredulous. "Give the money to the poor." By then there were 3 more reporters behind the first, with the cook giving me a dirty look, looking askance at the men walking in. "They can't stay here, Mr. John. You'll have to go." So I moved out to the porch where it was cooler, letting the reporters queue up out there. I really didn't care what the reporters wrote so long as it was factual and civil. The communist censors already had them well trained. Charlie brought Edna out to join me. She sat off to one side, listening to the birds and sipping on gin. After the reporters had gone off to file their stories, Cymbeline came out to join me. She asked, "What do we do about Edna?" "I don't know. We can't do anything before the Baroness talks to her." "I'll have a hard time squeezing her in, but I'll slip the Baroness a note." "I'm here," said Edna. "I'm blind, not stupid." "I'm so sorry," said Cymbeline. "I didn't mean to offend." "Well, you did." Cymbeline shared a look with me, so I nodded. That really was Edna. Everything from her was an act all of the time. I said, "It's here or jail, Edna. What do you want?" She refused to respond. Meanwhile, news kept rolling in. I kept notes as best as I could, feeding the information to my reporters. It was the sort of information that ought to have remained secret, but I wanted some damned honesty in this new government. If this little revolution was to succeed, the people needed to know. There was a price being paid in blood. Mel would have wanted it that way. Bad news had already come through. In Philadelphia, the capital of the Free States, the People's Division had remained loyal to the Communist Party. Equipped with large trucks, the division had rushed from Norristown to Philadelphia in just a few hours. On that day, we saw visions of the wars to come. Meanwhile, the battleship Pennsylvania, which was harbored there, also remained loyal to the Communists. That combination would prove heartbreaking. In Annapolis, the previous governor had committed suicide, but not before he and his men had killed his wife, his 5 children, and his entire staff. The governor's mansion was a bloodbath. Down in Baltimore, there was still fighting on Pratt Street where the Communist Party headquarters held out. They showed no signs of breaking. The hours grew late. When the reporters changed, I barely noticed. The reporters kept hounding me with questions, so I took to writing down and collating all available information. Every hour or so, I read out my notes to the reporters. I may have napped in there, but I don't remember. I don't think that I tracked time at all until the pre-dawn lit the back porch. Edna slept curled up on the swing. An hour after dawn, I finally had an opportunity to speak to the Baroness. She looked no better than me. I'm not sure that anyone in the house had slept. "The night is over, John." "Oh, blessed morning." "Yes, blessed morning." "I'm told that you have news for me." I felt confused. Had I lost track of something? "No, you have everything. I've passed all the news on to the reporters as well." "Not their news, John. Your news." I stood there confused, unable to remember yesterday, as one can remember one last dream from another. The world had changed since yesterday morning, since 2 days ago. Fiat Lux's star had faded with the light. I spoke with divine right. Excitement dawned across the Baroness's face. "And?" "Her name is Edna Clark. Don't be alarmed, but she's asleep on the swing over there." With no breeze, the swing did not move. Given that beginning, my story begged a middle, so I told the Baroness as much as I could, hitting the major details. As I told my story, she clasped my hands between hers, holding on firmly. You have brought me something new just as I believed you would, the Baroness said. I didn't believe that sentiment. No, I've not done anything new. Those women have all the newness to them. They're the ones who are new. I'm just the guy who spotted it. She squeezed my hands. Dear John, that's why I hired you. Who else could have spotted them, vetted them, and determined their worth? No one else but you. My trust in you has been repaid to me sevenfold. What of Edna? The woman lost the flush in her eyes. I don't know. I am torn with indecision. I see the needs of love and forgiveness, and I see the needs of justice. Should I begin my administration with a cover-up? I saw her dilemma. It was my time to speak, to create something out of nothing. I'd love to train her. I'd love to develop this. I'm sure that we could recreate her technique, but that would take a decade, maybe two. If you hold off prosecuting her, I can make sure that she's out there helping people right now. The Baroness smiled again for me. I would do anything for that smile. If you believe in her, then I will support you. Follow your vision. I feel that you have been touched by higher beings, and that she is now part of our lesson to lift all of humanity to a higher age. If God has forgiven her, then who am I to stand against that? I prayed to God that her belief was true.